I have never described what's going on in Gaza as genocide. I'm well aware of the definition of genocide, and that is why I've never described this and referred to it as genocide.
Yeah, when they came in February, they got all of us who were still here, they put our hands behind our backs, tied them up, put a hood over our heads, made us stand for 10 hours, beat us, cursed us in Arabic, humiliated us. And then some were taken away, some were killed, some were detained, some were released. We had a medical student who worked with us who described how the women had all been lined up and been told to strip down to their underwear and made to stand for hours like that, which is deeply, deeply humiliating, particularly in that culture. And then when they told her she could go, they wouldn't give her her clothes back, so she had to run through the streets like that.
The travesty of British democracy is that it has voted a group of politicians to power as alternative to another group of politicians, even though there is not much to choose between the two. They stand shoulder to shoulder on siding with the enemy of humanity called Israel and supporting the genocide of innocent civilians in Palestine. You thought Rishi Sunak was a pathetic human being, which he was, for supporting Israel's genocidal campaign. Many voted to defeat this loser to enable Keir Starmer, a career human rights lawyer, to form a new government, thinking he would stand by the principles of liberal values and stick to his election promises. Not only did he go back on his big election promises, but he also adopted a more hawkish approach in support of Israel than his predecessor. You just have to watch his two horrible comments made in the temple of democracy called the parliament in as many weeks and see if these comments make you feel proud of being a British. Only 2 weeks ago, a Green Party MP drew his attention to the ongoing ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in North Gaza, where Israeli terrorists held a siege of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and denied them food and water for weeks, literally forcing them to die of starvation. This happened with the full knowledge of the powers that be of the world. So much so that even war criminal Anthony Blinken had to pretend to act concerned as he wrote a letter to Israel to end the genocide within 30 days. It's a different matter altogether that this was all a hogwash. He wrote a letter, Israel did not comply, and then Blinken went back saying that, well, Israel hasn't committed anything wrong. It was all designed, to win the elections. And when Democrats could not win the elections, so they had no reason to criticize Israel. Nothing has improved. But Blinken was defending Israel. Anyway, that's a different topic altogether. We have covered that in abundance. But this is how Starmer reacted in Parliament. Just see the disgust in his tone for Palestinians and how he flaunted never calling the mass murder of Palestinians by Israelis as genocide.
Caller Denny.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The ICJ has mandated that Israel ensures access to life-saving aid in Gaza under Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, yet the Israeli government has voted to effectively block its delivery. As a human rights lawyer, does the Prime Minister agree that banning UNRWA is a breach of international law? And how much more evidence does he need before calling out what is happening as a genocide and acting in line with the UK's responsibilities as a signatory of the Genocide Convention?
Minister.
I'm very worried and concerned about the decision that's just been taken by the Parliament in relation to UNRWA. There's a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, and that decision will only make it much worse, which is why I've expressed my concern about it already before today and will continue to do so. It needs to be reversed. It needs to be reversed very, very quickly indeed. I have never described what's going on in Gaza as genocide. I do agree that all sides should comply with international law.
Now, that was 2 weeks ago. This week, independent MP Ayub Khan, who won the Paribas seat in Birmingham on the Gaza issue, asked him about the ongoing genocide by Israelis. Once again, Starmer left no doubt in anyone's mind that he hated the question. He gave a menacing look to the MP who had asked the question and arrogantly dismissed the genocide claim against Israel.
Mr. Speaker, Article 2 of the United Nations Genocide Convention makes it explicitly clear that genocide is not about numbers, it's about intent. And the intent of the Israeli government and the IDF has been explicitly clear in words and in actions over the past 400 days. More than 45,000 innocent men, women and children killed. On the 28th of October, the Foreign Secretary denied that a genocide was even taking place and suggested that the Israeli army had not yet killed enough Palestinians to constitute a genocide. And last week, the PMQs, the Prime Minister started that he has never referred to the atrocities happening in Gaza as a genocide. Will the Prime Minister share his definition of genocide with this House, and will he state what further action he is prepared to take to save lives of desperate and starving men, women and children, given that we now hold the presidency of the United Nations Security Council?
It would be wise to start a question like that by reference to what happened in October of last year. I'm well aware of the definition of genocide, and that is why I've never described this and referred to it as genocide.
I don't think even an Israeli spokesperson would be able to put up such a powerful defense of his or her genocidal regime as being showcased by Starmer these days. In between the period that this Zionist PM made these disgraceful comments on genocide, a renowned NHS surgeon who worked all through this conflict in Gaza was giving testimony before a parliamentary select committee. British Parliamentary Select Committee. Now someone should show these clips to Starmer and ask him what more evidence does he need before concluding if what Israeli terrorists are doing in Gaza amount to genocide.
The drones existed before October last year. It's been a feature of Palestinian life for some time. But now the drones inspire fear, I think, and they inspire fear in me. And when I used to debate about sleeping outside on the stairs or inside in this very crowded hot room, part of that decision was whether the drones had the ability to pick me off when I was on the stairs.
Identify you?
Sorry?
Identify you?
No, shoot me. So that's what they do. What I think I found particularly disturbing was that a bomb would drop maybe on a crowded, tainted area, and then the drones would come down and...
Please take your time. We're incredibly grateful that you're making the time to be here today, and I can only imagine just how it has impacted you and will continue to impact you. And I feel, because you can't unsee what you've seen, but being able to share that with us really helps us hold legislators particularly to account. So we do appreciate the time that you're making for us today. Thank you.
So the drones would come down and pick off civilians, children, and we had description after description. This is not, an occasional thing. This was day after day after day, operating on children who would say, I was lying on the ground after a bomb had dropped, and this quadcopter came down and hovered over me and shot me. And the bullets that the drones fire are these small cuboid pellets, and I fished a number of those out of the abdomen of small children. I think the youngest I operated on was a 3-year-old who had a major injury to the artery in her neck, and we used the last shunt, which is a device you use to bypass the artery in the neck to keep supplying blood to the brain. We used the last one in the hospital. I was operating on one young girl one night who died not long afterwards, and I can't even begin to describe her injuries. But when I'd finished operating on her, an ophthalmologist was trying to take out her left eye, which was just pulp. And he was a lovely, gentle man, maybe 5 years older than me. And he was, while he was working, he was just saying, yeah, when they came in February, they got all of us who were still here, they put our hands behind our backs, tied them up, put a hood over our heads, made us stand for 10 hours, beat us, cursed us in Arabic, humiliated us. And then some were taken away, some were killed, some were detained, some were released. We had a medical student who worked with us who described how the women had all been lined up and been told to strip down to their underwear and made to stand for hours like that, which is deeply, deeply humiliating, particularly in that culture. And then when they told her she could go, they wouldn't give her her clothes back, so she had to run through the streets like that.
You can watch the full video of Dr. Nizam Mahmood here. We carried it in full. It's absolutely worth watching. If you haven't watched it, do watch, do share. That's a brave, brave testimony by Dr. Nizam Mahmood. This just shows the extent Starmer is prepared to go to please Israelis. Mind you, same Starmer was declaring the goings-on in Ukraine as war crime, even though there is absolutely no comparison between the sufferings of Palestinians and those claimed by the Western countries for Ukrainians.
With your lawyer's hat on, is Vladimir Putin a war criminal?
Yes.
Yes.
What I've seen already amounts to war crimes, particularly the awful attacks on civilians. And I think it's very important that he's held to account and is responsible. And all those that are acting with him know that they too will be held to account. And this is something which we need to make clear now, so that those who are involved at the moment know what the consequences are.
Abby in Paddington, does Sir Keir Starmer agree with the use of the word genocide?
In what sense?
I imagine in Gaza, the Israel committing genocide in Gaza.
Well, look, I've said repeatedly, Israel has to exercise its right to self-defence within international law. No, Abby, and anyway, I'm not going to sit in an LBC studio and pronounce that something is either genocide or not. And so I'll tell you for why, Nick.
Keir, you can't decide about the guns, the weapons. I'm sorry, you can't decide about genocide. Why,
Nick? Allow me, please. In the fall of Yugoslavia, all sorts of atrocities were committed. I represented Croatia in the International Court for 3 months, where we argued about genocide. We reviewed 3 months' worth of evidence. At the end of that, the court itself then had to make a decision based on all of the evidence. That's how it works. Not politicians sitting looking at clips, bits of footage here and there and coming to decisions based on that. It has to be Israel, every country has to be held properly to account in accordance with international law, but the body that does that is the International Court that's set up in order to do so. And having literally argued in court for 3 months over the meaning of genocide, the evidence of genocide, I'm very well aware of what it is. I'm also very, very well aware that you need to have the evidence in front of you before you come to a final decision.
Now, this puts his comments on LBC in the immediate aftermath of the 7th of October attacks in proper perspective.
I'm very clear. Israel does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
a siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water? Sir Keir?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation.
I drew Starmer's attention to Israeli terrorists' latest act of genocide in Beit Hanun, where they first allowed the entry of aid after many weeks, and just when hungry and desperate Palestinians tried to access these aid materials, Israeli terrorists burned their tents and all those aid materials. What level of psychopath or mentally depraved group of people you have to be to commit such barbaric acts? I asked Starmer if he still thought this was not a genocide. I also asked him how he managed to sleep at night. Cry, my dear British people, for political class has not learnt anything from its bloody history. A history which is replete with the gory tales of slavery, forced starvation, causing famines and bloodshed of innocent people and slaughtering people after carrying out their blockade. I come from India, where British ruled for over 200 years. Just Google Bengal famine, Jallianwala Bagh massacre, Kala Pani punishment, Boer concentration camps, and list goes on. According to one estimate, British killed more than 100 million Indians. Yes, 100 million Indians within the span of 40 years. Starmer's unflinching support for a genocide in 2024 makes perfect sense when you read about the brutal history of the British rulers abroad in the past. That's it for me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.